Augies Worldwide. I'm Dave Kassler, amateur radio call sign KE0OG, here with another episode of Ask Dave. Today's question comes from Richard Alexander, KO4NTR. He says, my son and I are newly licensed techs and I'm upgrading next week. Good for you. I had tried to get licensed about 50 years ago, but with ADD and some other issues, I found Morse code almost impossible back then and didn't test. Now I'm 69 and he's 29, so it's about time. Actually, have 3 questions, but I'll submit them separately, and he only sends 2 in here. First, in your 80-meter antenna, you mentioned difficulties in covering the whole band. Can a trapped antenna be constructed to cover, say, 3.5 to 3.65, then 3.7 to 3.75, and finally 75 meters? We are extremely limited antenna space with overhead power lines and trees, but we do have a 2-meter repeater within 2 miles. So, to answer that question, the short answer is kind of no. It's been talked about. I've gotten comments from several people about trying it, but I've never seen it done. You have to add a little light loading and just the right frequencies, and frankly, I don't know how you do that, and nobody else apparently does either. So you have to do something that mechanically changes the length of the antenna, or something like that, or a switching arrangement. You can put relays up there, RF relays, so you get all kinds of fun feeding DC to them over the coax. To switch in and out extra segments and so on, that can be done too. That's very complicated. I've never seen anybody actually do it. And you say extremely limited antenna space. An 80-meter antenna, the low end of the band, is 132 feet long. The short end of the band, it's 120. So you're talking a fair amount of space, and it would be nice to get the antenna up high if you can do that. Now, another thing you can do is to build a loop, 80-meter full wavelength loop, if you can build it in a square, something like that. You only have to have a quarter, so there's the 66 feet, 32 feet on the side, okay? And you feed that with ladder line and a ballon and a wide range antenna tuner, and you can tune anywhere you want on the band. Now, one of the problems with the so-called sky loop, which that is that it tends to radiate straight up unless you can get the thing up to a half wavelength. A half wavelength on 80 meters is 132 feet. Very few people can get an antenna that high. So you're going to end up with something that's going to radiate up. You can also look at, if you've only got a certain piece of 80 meters you want to use, like FT8, MFJ sells ham sticks. You can get a dipole version of it. They're only about 8 feet on the side, so 16 feet. Put it up as high as you can get it, and you tune them and leave them for whatever part of the band you want. They actually work quite well. They're highly loaded, henceforth they're high Q, but meaning narrow bandwidth, but they do work. I used it. It's part of the MFJ octopus antenna. You don't have to go for the whole octopus, but you can do just the 80-meter part if you want, or 80 meter, or 40 meters, or whatever. They sent me an octopus to check. It had 80, 40, 20, and 10 meters. The 40 covered, I think, the whole band. The 80 did not. Or did the 40 just cover part of the band? Anyway, I did a video on it. You can go back and check. Now, his second question is entirely different. Why are radios so blankety-blank expensive? I was kind of expecting radios in the $500 range, but used radios cost almost as much as new ones. Any suggestions? Yes, the ICOM 718 or the Yaesu FT450 are their radios. They're venerable radios. They've been around quite a while, but they're still sold new. Are much, much less expensive radios than all of the other radios out there. If you can't fork over for an ICOM 7300, which is the reference station. Try one of those. They're in the $500, $600, $700 price class, somewhere in there. They're nice radios. They are what I would call point and shoot radios. They don't give you a lot of features, a lot of filters or things like that. But I know people with Yaesu 450s who've had them for years and love them. So I haven't heard from ICOM 718 users, but I have heard from the Yaesu 450 users. It's a Yaesu 450D. The D means it has an internal antenna tuner. Now, that'll only tune up to 3-to-1 SWR, but that will help in a lot of cases. Like, for example, if you have a 40-meter antenna, it'll tweak it all the way across the whole band and so on. So, why are they so expensive? Okay, they're sophisticated electronic devices. Now, your iPhone, if you have an iPhone, I'm not sure where mine is, if you have an iPhone, those actually cost a lot more to build than they are sold for, because they figure they're going to get their money back in your monthly fees. They used to give away phones, and now they've taken to charging for iPhones. You can pay $1,000 for one, but the actual phone costs more than that to build. The Yaesu, or the ICOM 7300, which sells for $1,000-ish to $1,200-ish. I've taken it apart. It has got a lot of circuit boards and a lot of electronics in there that cost money to make. Plus, and this is the key point, the market is not there to spread the R&D costs across. That's why amateur radio manufacturers don't come out with new radios very often, because they have to spread the R&D costs across a number of years and what revenue they're getting from their current radios. The 7300 was a major breakthrough in SDR technology, and they've been selling it now for years, several years. I've had mine probably for a couple years, and I got them 5 or 6 years after they first came out. There's a lot to them. If you look at the old tube-type radios, they were nowhere near as sophisticated. And yet you look at what those radios would be in today's prices, and they'd be even more expensive than the radios that we get today. So they can use some components that they use in a lot of radios. For example, ICOM does not do just amateur radio. It does commercial radio, it does marine radio, and it does aviation radio. I have a handheld ICOM transceiver for aviation frequencies, and my aircraft has an ICOM radio in it for aviation communications. So they spread it across as much as they can. Also, there is a tendency to sell radios for what the market will bear. The ham radio manufacturing community has set expectations among people as to what kind of features you get for what kind of bucks. Okay, and they got to make money in there somehow, or they'll get out of it. They market worldwide, and they have to what they call localize the radios. Like, for example, the radio is localized to United States frequencies. For example, the ICOM 7300 does not have the 4-meter band because the United States does not have a 4-meter band. If this radio were sold in Great Britain, you'd have the 4-meter band in there too. So you got to keep track of all that. It's a complex undertaking. Ham radios, especially the nice ones, have always been rather pricey. Heathkit was fairly inexpensive. I paid, I think, $89 for my HW16 when I graduated from school in 1975. Well, that's 46 years ago. Okay, that same radio today would be well over $1,000, and it's nowhere near as sophisticated as the 7300. So radios are expensive, yeah. The 450, I think I would go for it, and look, it's a nice radio. If you can save your money for a 7300, do that. But if that FT450 looks like it'll satisfy your needs, go after it. That radio will last you a while, and you won't outgrow it. as much as you might outgrow a 718. The 7300 is a radio that would take a very long time to outgrow. What you grow into is the ICOM 7610. I had one here for a while. It belonged to Brad Rich, N6GR. Wow, what a nice radio. But that's like a $4,000 or $5,000 radio, so we're not going to talk about that. So I hope I've answered your questions about why things cost what they cost. I mean, it's a market where the manufacturers have to make money, where they have to get back their R&D costs, and where the components literally come from all over the world, not just China. There's a lot of components made in Japan. You know, when the Fukushima earthquake hit and destroyed the power plant and other things like that, it also destroyed a couple small semiconductor manufacturers. Well, as it turned out, those were the only semiconductor manufacturers in the world that made what they did. And the chips that they made became parts of other chips that go into automobiles. And for about 2 years after, there was a real problem with part shortages for automobiles. The industry is having the same problem right now. Intel has recently stepped up and said it will make some of the chips that the American auto manufacturers are having trouble getting because of supply problems. COVID has been an issue worldwide, shutting down factories and stuff, and showing just how intricately woven the supply net really is. That an earthquake in Japan can cause a problem for a chip maker in China that causes problems for an auto manufacturer in the US. Several years ago, I don't know if you remember this, a lot of people will, they had terrible, terrible floods in Bangkok, in Thailand. Most of the world's disk drives are made in Bangkok, about 80%. And a lot of those production facilities flooded. And so for a while, the price of disk drives doubled. Some PC manufacturers had real problems putting their PCs together because they couldn't get disk drives for them. Now, needless to say, they very quickly moved that manufacturing equipment to higher ground. But there was about a year there where it was real hard to get a disk drive. The way capitalism works, it's designed around efficiency. And the ultimate in efficiency is a single plant. You know, then you can really be super, super, super efficient in that one plant. But if something happens to that plant, you've got a problem. For example, for manufacturing tubes like in guitar amps and stuff like that, there is a manufacturer in Estonia that makes them. Back when the USSR was a thing, all the tubes in Russia were made at that one plant in Estonia because it was the most cost-effective thing to do. Well, then when the USSR broke up, now they had to import their tubes from Estonia. And it's still, that's where you get your tubes from over there. Well, there's just a lot that could go on with the economic history and what affects what. But right now we are facing a supply shortage of chips, and it will affect things for a while. But capitalism is not good at recovering from disasters instantly, but in the long term, like 2 or 3 years, it's very good at recovering because you can get disk drives now, no problem at all. Okay, so I hope that helps. That is this episode of Ask Dave. There you have it. Until we next meet, 73.